So as Mark mentioned, I wrote a book a while back called Building Responsive Data Visualization for the Web. I actually got that book contract by speaking at one of these conferences and getting off stage and a woman walking up to me and offering me that. So these are cool conferences. What I've realized from doing a couple of these is the best thing to do is to, on the way to your vacation, sleep deprived and tired and all ready to go, throw a bunch of stuff out and restart. So, to that point, I got on a plane last week, and my phone immediately died, which is where I had all of my podcasts and all my music. And as we were taking off, the flight attendant got over the air and said, "Today's flight will have 10 episodes of The Big Bang Theory and nothing else, and no Wi-Fi. And if you want to plug your phone in, you need one of those cigarette chargers from 1998. So luckily, I was going to London, so I had put, anyone know the movie? James Bond, Casino Royale, on my phone. Had to just get in the mood for being in London. And Casino Royale is from 2006, right, 10 years ago. This is what phones looked like. This was like a terrorist's phone in the middle of someplace. This is what super advanced phones look like. This is James Bond's phone, so this was made to look really cool and futuristic, right? So if you were a spy 10 years ago, this is what your phone looked like. And 10 is a lot of years in our industry, so I'm not going to talk about how, yes, phones have gotten better. What I'm going to talk about is how as soon as James Bond takes a phone out, it's exactly the screen he wants it to have. Like he would pull it out, see this, and then throw it somewhere, and then he'd suddenly have it again because that's what the director needed a little earlier in the movie. So what I'm talking about today is how we can start to get to interfaces that are a little more geared towards decision making, towards enabling our users to starting a task and then finishing it as quickly as possible, and getting to interfaces that are actionable and allow someone to stop using that interface as quickly as possible. There's 3 ways I'm going to talk about. That's abstracting from expressions of our application, and I'll explain that in a bit. Building prioritized and obvious interfaces, and designing interfaces that machines can understand, not just people with actual people intuition. And sort of figuring out what is doing mobile wrong for 10 years, maybe less than that, but at least starting out doing it wrong, actually taught us, and what we actually start to need to build for as mobile becomes an antiquated word, and how we can build and not paint ourselves into a corner. And then my connection was lost. So, first off, we used to build for these things, right? Not these ones, but bigger ones that I didn't have a vector of. And we had it easy, right? Fewer people had the internet, and when they did, it was slow for everyone, not just some people. And we had lots of screen space, and we had lots of time. And that started to go away, right? People spent less time on these devices. People spent less time using their devices in a casual, luxurious kind of way. We got to more decision-based interfaces. And I think what the advent of mobile sort of brought us was we're not just designing for hundreds of screen sizes and form factors. We're more designing for people maybe getting online for the first time in their lives on a device like this, on a connection that's on par with ones from 1996, right? Ones that we're used to being very, very old. And as Mark said this morning, there's 6 billion phones in the world right now, and only half of them are smart. So there's people that are going to be experiencing an internet that's tailored for really heavy experiences or really complex interfaces that they've never built up these affordances to getting to skipping all the fluff in our interfaces. So I want to point out that right now I only have mobile devices. I left Expedia last week. I start my new job next week writing a bunch of code for them. And I'm at a point where, as an engineer, I don't need a computer to not write code. So these are the only things I have with me. I've made this and presented off of this. That's nuts, right? It's 2016. I write code for a living. I don't have a computer. This is what I brought to the Mobile Innovation Summit. We are innovating here. And so if this is today, the techniques we're sort of using for mobile right now are what? We have apps that people use once and uninstall, and they're heavy, and they're hard to get people to put on their phones to begin with. We, at one point, had mobile-specific sites. Thankfully, that's gone away, because that was a duplicated effort. We came up with the concept of responsive design, and that sort of changed how we've started to build things for the mobile web. And then Luke Wroblewski talked about mobile-first responsive design, right? Building for these guys, because they're what matter, and maybe growing up to larger form factors, to more mature devices. But how much of that was just laziness from designing for desktop, meaning designing for not making decisions on behalf of people? Right, if we're building for a zillion sizes and device types, and tablets, and we're building for digital sales that now outpace physical stores by factors of 5. What comes next? Are we designing for wearables? Are we designing for the Internet of Things? And what does mobile actually mean at this point? Because I feel like, right, we made this term as the thing that's going to break all of our design patterns 10 years ago now, 9 years ago now, and we haven't really reevaluated how we use this term. So is it a small screen? Is it a bad network? Is it someone using a laptop actually on their lap, on the train, on the go, on a 3G network? That's where we are right now. So again, I changed a lot of this because that's what you do when you have a presentation. So I was at the V&A earlier in the week, and they have a room of things that they know people will want them to have 20 years from now. And part of that is a cabinet of mobile devices. So this is the Epson, I want to get this right, HX20. This is the first portable computer. What year do we think this came out in? Shout it out.
96.
Very close. It took cassettes, it could do some math. It's what we called a computer in 1982. This is more interesting, though. This is the BT Bronze. Guess that same year again.
86.
Yeah. We decided to make phones mobile 4 years after we decided to make computers mobile. That's crazy. And right, 1980, so Tim Berners-Lee was working on the World Wide Web project while this was all happening. Both my mom and my grandma had 2 of these. This was the Visor Deluxe. It came out in the year 2000. And it was sort of, I mean, it wasn't the first PDA, but it was the first, like, publicly marketed, we want everyone to have these, not just business boys. 2014 years it took us to cram those 2 things together and say, people are going to want these to do more than just, I don't know, math again. That's a long time. And now, obviously, we're not designing for things like that because we're still here. But we're designing for the things that came after this date. Who knows this date? Yeah. And there were other smartphones, of course, but right, we can sort of point to that as how we've panicked about mobile and continued to panic for the past 9 years. And so once again, is it small screen? Is it a bad network? Is it on the go? I don't know, we were looking back so far. And I think we've spent these past 9 years focusing too much on designing for different pieces of machinery, different phones, different tablets. We have an Android app, we have an iPhone app, we have a different app for bigger sizes of iOS devices. And more recently, we're designing for actual physical devices that have internet crammed into them, or wearables. And a study that the BBC put out a couple years ago said that we switch interfaces 21 times per hour at home. That's a lot of switching, right? And 90% of the people doing that have the TV on the entire time. So we're distracted, and we're moving between these devices that don't always speak to us in the same language. And so they're tightly knit into our lives, and they're very well designed for what we use those devices for in a silo, but they don't really speak to each other well, and they don't allow us to just seamlessly move between these interactions. And speaking just about the web, about having internet in things, Jeremy Keith, a couple years ago, had this great quote on his blog. The web is not binary. It's not 1 or 0, on or off. It's not a platform where you get 100% or 0%. It's this continuum. And what he was talking about was progressive enhancement, meaning that if you're looking at a browser, if JavaScript fails, you lose some interaction. If your CSS doesn't load, you lose some style. If you don't support some HTML, it'll just render as a block. You're always going to get the content. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm stealing this quote for is that all of our interfaces also need to be a continuum. We just need to allow people to get to the core content, the core interaction. And if we have some beautiful styling, some amazing interaction methods, great. But those cannot be necessary. Those cannot be the things we're designing for. Because everything has the internet inside of it, and that core functionality needs to be what we're actually designing for. So this is our first point. We can't allow individual expressions, individual interfaces of our application dictate our architecture. When we're building for this next wave of our connected devices of the internet within every single thing we use, we need to build for universal feature access. Traditional product design is sort of device-centric, right? We need to be thinking less about devices and more about actually reducing duplicated effort and duplicated interfaces. And I'll get to this in a bit, but the spoiler is that's going to be looking at things API first. We need ways to communicate across different disciplines within our teams to then communicate across different interfaces to our end users. So how do we do this wrong? Nobody works at Yelp, right? Okay, good. So Yelp launched their mobile app in 2008. They launched it without the ability to write reviews. Yelp bases a whole lot of its business on writing reviews. It took them 5 years to put that functionality into their app. And a year after they had done it, 56% of their reviews came from their mobile app. By the end of last year, 70% of their searches came from mobile as well. They're a mobile company. It took them 5 years to just not keep people from using their interface. Everyone wants to do everything all the time on whatever device you give them. We can't keep people from using our interfaces, regardless of what they're actually touching them with. And so, a quick logic lesson. Deductive reasoning. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Inductive reasoning. Every tornado I've ever seen in Illinois spins counterclockwise, and I've seen dozens of them. Not actually. We see a tornado in the distance, and we're in Chicago. I conclude that the tornado we see must be rotating counterclockwise. Make sense? So in product design, our new features for all the interfaces we already have need to be deductive, while our new interfaces need to be inductive. By which I mean, if I have a new feature for all of my users, and all of my users are my users, everyone's going to want this, so I need to build it for every interface I have available. And inductively, if I have some new input method, I have users that don't understand it, and I don't understand those users yet, so I need to re-roll all of my interaction methods that I've actually proven before to decide if they still work across every now interaction method that I have, to be prioritized and obvious as a layering of features that people can get to either right away or obviously get to what they actually need. This is what happens when you do it wrong. I used to work at this company, and this is a whole pile of features that get added on just sort of ad hoc. So at one point, we wanted flexible search dates, and we needed a whole pile of flight details, and we needed some SEO links to say we fly to places, and here's our customer care, it's an image, and how do we put this on mobile? How do we put this on a watch? How do we do anything other than leave it on this side screen? And you realize like that's an old Safari, but when we redesigned, we just redesigned. We put new pretty on top of all of these features. And then when we tried to roll a tablet version of our site, a mobile version of our site, a responsive version of our site, as we built apps, we had to start from scratch every time. And so I think to answer that first question of what is mobile, it's we don't have an excuse to give someone everything and then tell them to figure it out. Mobile is we don't have people's attention anymore, and we can't give them something like this. Point number 2. Our interfaces need to be prioritized. They need to be obvious. Because again, we don't have attention, we don't have bandwidth, we don't have time to waste. We're not going to keep users on our site just because they love using the internet. So our interfaces need to be prioritized, meaning the most likely use case needs to be layered first. It needs to be the first thing that people see so they can look at your app, your website, your whatever, decide, yes, this is right, I'm done. If it's not that, it needs to be obvious, meaning any change they need to make should be so pithy, so obvious, that it doesn't need to be explained. So where have we actually done this so far? I think it's here. I think it's designing for the smallest screen we probably are designing for right now. The Messages app, right? You get a message, it shows up on here, but it also shows up on here. You can read it, you can get a couple of canned responses. If those aren't what you actually need, then you move to this and you do something else. But you have a prioritized list of interactions. Let's go to a little more complicated of an example. I love this app. I don't have an Apple Watch. I don't really like them. But I love the idea of this app because this is your prioritized main screen. If you open up the fitness app, you get all of this information. I'm going to get all of these out, so I'm going to read them very quickly. Stand is one of the types of activities. Stand is represented by the word stand. Stand is represented by the color blue. Stand is represented by an arrow pointing up. The user has completed 25% of his or her standing goal. Exercise is one of the types of activity. Exercise is represented by the word exercise. Exercise is represented by the color green. Exercise is represented by 2 arrows pointing forward. The user has completed 45% of his or her exercise goal. Move is another type of activity. Move is represented by the word move. Move is represented by the color red. Move is represented by 1 arrow pointing forward. The user has completed 55-ish% of his or her movement goal. Is that it? No. Let's have these on the bottom. If we have the prioritized list of things that maybe that's all I need to see, that I've only stood for a quarter of how much I should today, maybe I want to dig into that. These dots on the bottom show that I'm on view of 4 of 6, that I can very obviously move to a different part of this app. And if I do that, I dig one layer into this information. Maybe now I've gotten to what I actually need. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I want to go even further. And I get information like this. And so the top is that previous view, but if we look at the bottom, this is closer to how a computer would see this, right? This is what the machine is actually probably looking at. It's those individual increments of this information that gets summarized and shown to a user in this prettier, more parsable way. But these 72 20-minute increments throughout the day, that's how a computer is going to see this. And this is how we can start talking to different machines with our interfaces. More on that in a second. Let's pause, though, and decide why this matters in like a touchy-feely, warm kind of way. Let's do another guess. What year is this phone from? 95? Any others? 2008? Yeah. This is the XTG S18 power bank phone. It is a bestseller in Ghana. It has a removable battery that can be used to charge other devices. It has 3 SIM card slots. It has an LED light port. It is a bestseller in Ghana because Ghana has 36-hour rolling power outages. Phones aren't just for using the internet in a fun way, right? This could be the only way to get online. This could be the way you're charging your traditional cell phone that you need to call people. This could be the way you're charging your smarter smartphone. It could just be your light. The point is you can't waste that battery just playing around on the internet. You need to get to the things that you need, and then you need to be done. But whatever, we're not in Ghana, right? We're in this room, we're in this realm. We have fancier ways of using the internet. So how does this relate to us? Maybe something like this, right? Kindle, Netflix, Dropbox, we've gotten very good at syncing static content across our different interfaces. So if we look at Dropbox on the web, I have this big folder of stuff. You'll notice one of those says, "Hey idiot, resume here. I kept losing my resume." Here it is on an iPad. It's very whited out, but it looks exactly the same. On the phone, yeah, you guessed it. The display is different, but the intention is the same. I can very actionably get to exactly what I need. Spotify does this in a cooler way. They're sort of getting to intention matching your context, not just matching your device. So you better believe if I look for some stuff, it's going to look great, and then it's going to continue to look great. But there's some new interaction methods based on how I'm speaking between these devices that are super cool. So I'm on the iPad, my battery's about to die. I want to switch to my phone really quickly. while listening to, I think, Starman. And I can throw it mid-song to this. That's rad. That's two devices speaking to each other. All I said was do it. They did something that I don't understand. I can start mid-song. All I said was please keep doing this. I didn't have to give any more complex interaction. But then let's go one step further. I'm midway through the song, and I realize, who needs to hear this is everybody. So I share it. And I put it on Facebook. Then on Facebook, we have this new view. And the most prioritized action is play. And that doesn't play the whole song. It plays a 30-second clip. Anyone else who isn't me, I'm not sharing that for myself, maybe I am, is going to get a piece of this song. I didn't tell it to do that. This is how it interacts with Facebook. Prioritized is play. Obvious is maybe I want to add it to Spotify. I've convinced someone. I've given it input to start doing this thing, and it had a conversation to do it in the way it wanted. And that becomes the most important part of this, is that our interfaces must be simple enough that a machine can use them. Right? A machine is our dumbest user. It has no intuition at all. So how do we start thinking away from designing for small screens and actually designing for the conversations between something that has no intuition at all? Well, we've already been doing it for a long time. Right? RSS feeds. They're just feeds of, we have a bunch of content, we have the metadata around that content. A lot of things can consume this and display it however the hell it wants. And it's just XML, it's just code. It's really obvious, it's really simple. But the point is it's open and it's available. So we have a title, we have a description, we have a link to the actual content, we have some global unique ID, we have a publish date. And the newer apps, very pretty apps, can take in an individual feed and display it like this. This is the news app on the iPad. And we can amalgamate a bunch of these. I have a list of ones that I like to keep up with. And it makes something like that. It's still just it's devices talking to RSS feeds from different sources of content. Instead of just the list, we can come up with the newest from a bunch of these and prioritize them. What about a different interaction method? What about podcasts? Well, they're the same thing. They're just RSS feeds. They're just more content that we have metadata around. So let's go the other way this time. We'll start at the list. If part of the metadata is a bunch of users have downloaded this, we'll know that. We'll know the people who interacted with it. We'll know that they're using it on different devices, using it on different interaction methods. And we'll come up with which ones are popular, which ones are paying money to show up here. Once I've picked a couple, I just have this feed. Anybody listen to My Brother and Me? Okay, it's a riot. But this is the same content, right? The only difference is it's not a link to a blog anymore. It's a link to a file that you can either download or stream. This is devices talking to each other. This is building an API to your actual content so that you're not deciding the interaction method. You're deciding to allow anyone to get to your content as quickly and as actionably as possible. And maybe you're doing it already. Like a good example of this is Instagram, right? When they were bought by Facebook for a whole lot of money for, 12 people, they didn't have a web experience. They decided to go iOS first, because they did, and then mobile first. And so very quickly they realized that people wanted to get to their content on the web, and they just couldn't. But they hadn't just built an app. They had built an API to their content that the app was consuming. So before building their own Instagram.com version of, hey, check out your content, they just opened up the API, and they let people build this themselves. That's nuts. All of this is so cool. They just allowed people to get to their content, so they didn't decide how people were going to get to it. So it makes a good API, in my humble opinion. Things like this. Access to the smallest piece of content that you can. This would be the deepest layer that you can get to in your information. But then deep filters to start to summarize and combine groups of your data. right? So you can get to a more prioritized view. As you have these individual pieces of content, you can group them and say that this is what people want as their prioritized list, or their prioritized list of prioritized lists, and getting to the most actionable interface by default. Just as good coding practice, it should be RESTful, so that anyone can get to it without having to do a whole lot of server-side nonsense that's a pain in the ass that I'll talk to in a second. It should have a standardized format with instructive errors and meticulous documentation. You'll notice I skipped one. That just means write good code. It should be open so that, like in the Instagram example, you can source what you actually need, not just from your own internal teams, but the market need for how people are interacting with your data. Because if it's open and if you're tracking how people are using it, you can decide that there's a different priority than what you assumed. But that intensive URLs is really important to me because it sort of goes with the RESTful idea, and it's that as you keep building out this API, turn your URLs into a sentence. If you're finding that everyone needs something that's labeled as blue, your api.com/blue should do that, right? It should be the list of prioritized things that people can get to as quickly and as obviously as possible. Quick example. I live in Chicago. Chicago has a transit system called the CTA. They have an app, they say. But they also have a really nice API that, unfortunately, you have to hit server-side, but it's still a nice API to get to train ETAs. So I built this quick web app that, as the prioritized view, I need to decide what route I'm taking. I'm taking the blue line. Once I get to the blue line, I have all the stops, or an option to get to the closest one. Let's say I click that. I then can hit their API and get the ETAs for upcoming trains. This is our smallest, most granular view. We bucket it by route, because that's a sorting filter that we would need. We get to the most prioritized view, which is I opened this thing, I need to decide where the hell I'm going. Building API first. There's a whole view of this that doesn't have a view, right? It's just lists of content, but this is how we decided to have it show up here. That's the least important part. Let's go back to this example. If we took the pretty off of this, let's just talk about exercise. It'd be pretty straightforward, right? We don't have a whole lot of content here. The green, the arrows, the fact that it's a circle, that's all part of this view. Our information is what people need to get to. Bless you. If we take one layer down, move would look something like this. We would only need to add what our total is, what our units are, what our goal is. That's the newest information. This is if we're getting to this URL and it's my fitness / am I actually moving? Am I a statue? This is what we get. This is all the information we need. Finally, that deep view, the most granular view. This is what we do probably before we started combining them at all. These increments are how we're starting to connect this data, how we're starting to amalgamate this data. And we want all of this available. We want all of this to be reachable, either by code or by humans. Because this is our goal, right? This is the pretty Hollywood version of a Turing machine. And our user should be this. It should just be a decision engine. Right? Our user should be something that can take in data way quicker than any one human could and make a lot of decisions and then be done. It doesn't need intuition. It just needs a yes or no. So, what did we do wrong? Like, how do we not screw this up this time? Well, in 9 years, we've still used the word mobile to describe everything that isn't a computer. We could probably stop doing that. We really just need to decide for what happens when machines start making the decisions for us, for when Spotify talks to my iPhone, my Alexa, and says, I'm in a new room, please start playing out of this instead. Because the contract we have with a user at this point is saying, did I make something that actually makes it easier to do this thing than if I had made nothing at all? Right, because we're innovators. This is why we're here. And if we're going to make things that empower our users to get action, to make decisions, we, these people in this room, are the ones that have to do it. We have to build things the right way before we build a bunch of things that are only solving for the screens we have today, before we're building that old orbits interface. Now I'll ask, did you listen to me reading that, or did you read the quote? We don't have a lot of attention, right? That's it. Thank you. I work there, I do stuff there, and I wrote that. Thank you very much.